US President Donald Trump says he is ready to impose tariffs on close to $500 billion worth of Chinese goods. Meanwhile, key issues are jeopardizing efforts to update the North American Free Trade Agreement. That could result in the US proceeding with a deal with Mexico, leaving Canada out in the cold. Canada is fighting to preserve independent arbitration panels, but the US says they've been used unfairly. Ottawa also wants to keep protections for its dairy and media industries. According to Bloomberg, Canadian officials don't think that they will reach a deal this week, but Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland says progress is being made.
A trade agreement is about all the pieces coming together. We are making good progress. And we continue to work in a constructive atmosphere with real good faith on both sides.
Also weighing on investors' minds are additional US tariffs on Chinese goods. Trump said on Friday he stands ready to tax $267 billion worth of imports from China. That is in addition to the $200 billion worth of goods that have been evaluated under a public consultation, which ended last Thursday without a decision being made. China and the US have already imposed tariffs on $50 billion of each other's goods. The new taxes would be a significant escalation in the trade war between the world's top two economic heavyweights. China has also said it'll give exporters of steel and electronics tax rebates to help cushion the blow of US tariffs on those products. Patrick Fock is in Hong Kong and sent us this report.
Well, there has already been significant economic impact. Chinese export orders have slowed for 3 consecutive months in August, pointing to a gloomy outlook. And in another worrying sign, manufacturing in Guangdong province, which is really at the heart of the Chinese export industry, contracted for the first time in 29 months in August. So if businesses aren't feeling the pinch already, then they are likely to be in the coming months. And China says that it will retaliate to any tariff measures that the US undertakes. But at the same time, its options are limited, given that it simply can't match the scale of the US tariffs imposed on it. But it has also said that it will look at measures to offset some of the pain, including things like favorable tax policies for businesses. But certainly it does seem as though the tariffs are biting.
So that's the view from China. Joining us now from New York is Max Wolff. He's chief economist at the Phoenix Group. Max, great to have you on the show once again. Lots to unpack here. Let's start with the mood amongst investors. Do people in the markets just basically want the US to make their decisions on both China and Canada and get on with it so that they can factor in all of these things into their investments?
So thanks for having me. Always great to be here. I think 2 things are going on. I think the United States continues to discount the possibility of a trade war that everybody else's markets have been discounting share prices in response to. And it's sort of ironic that we didn't notice we were in the war, having instigated it and being one of the 2 warring parties, but somehow to our short-term benefit, we didn't notice we were in a war. So our markets have held up and attracted some foreign capital. Don't know if that lasts forever, but it has lasted this far. And then the other thing is, I think people have continuously discounted the possibility that things would get even this far, let alone further. And I think they're probably unwise to do so. So we see some weakness in the market yesterday, see a little bit again today, not super pronounced here in the US. But I think the truth is that the president of the United States and the Chinese leadership is beginning to double down and make preparations to kind of wait out what looks to be a kind of escalating trade dispute here, cascading quickly above the $50 billion worth of goods, pushing up toward $300 billion that are at least now being discussed. And while the US and China have different footings because we import more from them than they do from us in the US, it's really not the point. I think people have missed the point, including the president perhaps of the US here, which is that non-tariff barriers and the international damage to the trade regime far more problematic and significant than the dollar value of the tariffs.
Right. That being said, looking at it from what Trump has just said, an additional $267 billion worth of tariffs. That's on top of the $200 billion that have already been telegraphed. We're talking about more than the US imported from China all of last year. How might China respond, and what impact would that have on the US economy?
Yes, so every time we get an escalation, the markets here sort of have a small temporary sell-off, which has largely been overwhelmed in the U.S. by good earnings news. Earnings season sort of coming to an end here, so we're going to get a lot less of the good earnings news for the short term to kind of cover things over. And the truth is that, you know, I think that as each time we don't have a resolution, but we have a double down, people have to take more seriously what's going on here. And again, I think the real story here is all the free trade momentum globally is lost. We now have intervention in trade momentum picking up. We have the #1 and #2 global economy, the engine of growth and the store of wealth, the US and China, at each other's throats. And we have a continuing situation here where there are spillover effects, where rising interest rates and strengthening dollars are starting to hurt economies around the world, while the big two beat each other over the head with the trade stick. And it just cannot be good for global growth, harmony, free trade, or the global economy to be in this situation this long, let alone much longer.
Let's turn our attention to Canada, because those talks still continue. No resolution there. What are the consequences for both Canada and the US if they walk away from NAFTA completely without a deal? Who comes out of it the worst?
Yeah, so to be fair to the Canadians, we kind of walked away from NAFTA and then walked away from including the Canadians in a bilateral discussion that was between the US and Mexico, then put them in a terrible situation by saying, okay, we left you largely out of this, we cut a deal with Mexico, we don't really care if you join it, but you can, if you don't, we'll leave without you. So not terribly hospitable, and the Canadians are now kind of struggling to come to a deal because they want one, and the world wants to see preserved this trade structure, a lot of folks, but they don't want to do it at too high of a cost in terms of what they need trade-wise, and also loss of face. So I think we have an issue. That being said, it's not 100% clear that all the contemplated U.S. actions are fully consistent with U.S. law. There is some scope for Congress who've been excluded from this, and they could choose to reassert themselves at any point, really.
Final question, Max. You mentioned Mexico. Who came out of that deal the better, Mexico or the U.S.?
So probably both sides can claim a victory, and the truth is, which is true of all decent trade deals, neither side had a decisive victory. We got some easing of domestic content for the U.S. and some minimum wage guarantees about how much content has to be made at a minimum wage to push some production back into the U.S. Basically what we did is copy some language from the TPP that we just rejected and try to use it in our Canadian relations. And it was good for both sides in that the United States made a very small amendment to NAFTA, which the president can tell his fans was a radical amendment and still appear to be true to his hard-on-trade roots without causing the kind of economic damage that particularly his colleagues in the House and Senate don't really want to see happen right before a November election cycle here.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Max Wolff of the Phoenix Group, thank you very much indeed.